Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer, as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you. As always, glad to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show and several big topics again this week. And Iran, Israel, US House looking to approve separate aid bills. But first, let's take up this big topic called Iran and Israel. They are trading limited attacks. Means what does it mean? They are making a lot of noise, but not actually in terms of the attacks, but in terms of words. What's happening in terms of attack as well as diplomacy here, Irina?
So I think the strategic communication here is more important than the military impact, because the military impact was not all that great on either side. If you look at it just from that a combat perspective, many of the Iranian drones and missiles fizzled out before they even took off. Others landed in other countries like Iraq and Jordan, and most of them were repelled by the various military defense systems that were employed in Israel, as well as by neighboring countries and with US coordination. The only real physical damage in Israel was a little Bedouin girl was wounded, and there was some infrastructural damage to a military base. But otherwise, the Iranians were trying to hit a major base that was located in Dimona, which is thought to be harboring nuclear facilities, but they did not significantly cause any major damage. So from that perspective, not much was achieved. Israel, on the other hand, penetrated the Iranian defenses quite easily. The Iranian defenses consisted of an S-300, which is an older Russian system, which was replaced by S-400. Turkey bought S-400. Recently, S-400 was also tried in Ukraine, but not with particularly great results. So the fact that S-300 was fairly easy to take out is not all that surprising. More interesting is where is the actual targeting, which was another military base located near Iran's nuclear facilities. So literally kind of a tit-for-tat messaging, but with better results for Israel. Essentially a message: we know where your good stuff is located, we can get you even there if we need to. But let's look at the big picture. The bigger picture is that several things happened that were unprecedented. First of all, these two countries have never been in direct conflict in history. And certainly, even after the Islamic Revolution, while Iran helped target Israeli targets in Argentina jointly with Hezbollah, they have never attacked Israel inside its own territory. And Israelis have staged attacks in Iran, but they have never done so openly in terms of actual airstrikes. So this is the first new development, and some people argue, and I agree with that the only reason Iran was able to do an obvious attack that it did was because they knew that US would not intervene and prevent them from doing so. So while I don't necessarily agree that there was some sort of a pre-arranged coordination directly with the administration, oh, we'll do this thing to save our face, that the White House, openly agreed to some sort of a propaganda strike after the killings of the generals in Damascus, I do think that Iran calculated correctly that US would not take any measures to prevent them from doing what they did, which is exactly what happened. So there may not have been a tacit agreement, but there was very clearly not an active effort to step in and basically put an ultimatum: either you back off or there will be very severe consequences. And we know that more of that because of the public statements by the administration to Israel that actually strongly discouraged any retaliatory measures in the aftermath. So we can see how US position was visible to Iran even before it took any steps. The second issue is that indeed uh, Iran is believed to not have been using its best weapons in the attack. In fact, it may have been deliberately using weaker or experimental weapons first to test the new weapons in real time when it knew it was safe to do so. It was not going to be a major attack, and it knew that whatever Israel did in return would also be limited. And also, even though all of these things could easily get out of hand regardless. And it also may have been deliberately keeping its best weapons out of the way because it doesn't want anyone to know the full extent of its capabilities. When it comes to defense, again, you could ask, well, why did they put up such weak defenses? Weren't they afraid that Israel could do something? Again, they calculated correctly that Israel would be concerned about a political fallout, that Israel would not want to expand a second front in light of everything else that's going on, and they also could afford to get sloppy. I am not sure that if they were expecting a real full-blown confrontation, that it would have been quite as bad. But we've also seen that Iran has indeed showed very weak counterintelligence internally when it came to an ISIS-K attack a while back, not too long ago. So it's possible that they really are that sloppy and really unconcerned about public safety. It's also entirely possible that they calculated Israel would not actually strike a nuclear base precisely because of the Biden administration discouraging from doing so, and because they did not want to open a nuclear front. Because if you do hit one nuclear base, you could get a nuclear response if Iran potentially has a bomb. So this is brings us to another important point. What was Iran counting on politically? And I think at this point, many people will guess that either it already is nuclear capable but has been hiding its capabilities, or it had gotten guarantees from friendly countries. Whether it's Russia, Pakistan, or China, we won't know. But regardless, but given that Iran is just now in the middle of important high level meetings with Pakistan, given that there's been a number of operations related to nuclear issues, there was a Pakistani enriched uranium smuggled out of through Oman commercial airline to Heathrow airport that was supposed to go to the RGC. There's also North Korea that we can't rule out, which has cooperated with Iran on a number of issues. So all of these actors could be lending Iran its own capabilities. And by the way, the missiles that Iran could use to strike Israel or anyone else in the future don't have to come from Iran. China has perfectly well seasoned missiles, so does Pakistan, so do other countries around the world, any of which would sell their weapons to Iran. So I wouldn't worry too much about the optics right now. Another big issue that not many people are paying attention to is the airspace disruption. So this caused an unprecedented situation where multiple countries have had to close their skies. And it lasted for several days and was a huge military and economic disruption. So imagine a situation in the air mirroring what is happening in maritime in the Red Sea, where commercial flights or even military flights are not able to reach their destinations due to uncertainty or expectation of an attack. That is a complete disaster. I would say even bigger than the waterway situation that we're now already facing. So I wouldn't assume that Iran always acts directly. It often may have hidden purposes, and this airspace um, situation may have been one that is actually far more dangerous than we expect because Israel on the one hand will be hard pressed to start a war over freedom of navigation in the skies, but on the other hand, it can cause serious damage without Iran actually putting itself in direct danger, and I think this is something to watch for in the near future.
Right, right, Irina. So, from a common man's perspective, from someone sitting here in India in a rural village, what will they understand? Do you think they are fighting or not fighting? It is almost like a video game that some parts will happen, some and nothing is actually true. How does it work? Are they fighting or it is more diplomacy? Let's look at the things. Israel in the attack on Damascus on Iranian facility, Iranian consulate.
Well,
Then afterwards, Iran had to attack. And then it all looked like it went on track to diplomacy. How does it look? But are they fighting, not fighting? Who are they trying to give this message? It is more of internal message or to each other?
well, the truth is, I think there is a lot of messaging going on. I don't think any of this, some people call it political theater of sorts. I don't think it's quite as strictly prearranged, but I do think that the escalation was not accidental. I do think that Israel has been wanting for a very long time to out Iran as the direct party behind the attacks. Not because US and others haven't called it out yet, it's an open secret, nobody is doubting it, but because nobody was willing to hold Iran responsible. And I think the killings of these two generals, maybe I think this was Israel's way of saying, "Look, we know exactly what you're doing, and we are ready to send a very serious message comparable on a scale to the killing liquidation of Qasem Soleimani by the U.S." Now, why did Iran feel hard pressed to respond to this particular assassination? Although Israel has been, attacked, assassinated IRGC commanders before in the past, certainly attacked various Iranian targets in Syria. Well, first of all, this was the most serious attack of its kind, certainly in a very long time. Second, there was already something brewing. Iran was already kind of instigating all these operations and using Israel as an excuse for all of them. And now there was a feeling that it had to kind of finally open up directly and have this public sort of reaction, because at this point everybody was saying, well, Iran is everywhere. They have a spy ship in the Red Sea assisting the Houthis. They've targeted a ship near India's coast directly, not through Houthis. They've done all these things directly. It's about time we actually call things what they are. There was the sense that both parties were already reached the point where they're kind of ready for a confrontation. Now, ideally, the sort of escalation would actually bring down the heat and would put an end to hostilities and everybody, But to me, this feels more like an opening salvo rather than a conclusion. Maybe Iran and Israel are not ready to fight directly now, but they're certainly getting ready. They're showing their claws, and I think this is a preparatory step. I think we can expect more later. When and how, the timing of it, obviously is hard to predict, but it shows that Iran is ready for fighting. It would not. I think Iranian counterintelligence may be weak, but its intelligence, when it comes to assessing Israel's capabilities, is quite strong. And no matter how many various agencies lie to each other about its own internal capabilities, I do think they view Israel as a serious adversary. I don't think they view it as some sort of a joke or a small country that's not able. So they would not be doing what they do if they did not calculate the political dimensions and the military possibilities directly. And the military possibilities is that in a real fight, Iran would not be fighting alone. It would be fighting with all of its proxies, including Hezbollah, which has over 150,000 long-range missiles. And which could potentially overwhelm all of Israel's defenses. It could, the Houthis are proven to be far more serious and well trained than many people estimated in recent years. Um, we have seen the Russians actually moving military in the Golan Heights, which has not happened before, and which is also shows potential ground preparation for something. It may not be, something direct, but it shows that there's movement. And we have seen Iran, China, and Russia participate in very serious maritime exercises recently, which also shows that all three countries, and in particular Iran, are looking to become major naval powers in the region. So all of that shows that there is a strategic preparation going far beyond small tactical uh, operations afoot, and that this leads me to believe that Iran is preparing for something far more serious and far more involved than this current situation that we've observed.
Right, Irina. Right. What is US's role? One is in the in front, what it is trying to show to the world, and one is behind the scenes. Has it been doing anything, or it has been doing nothing at all? Because its power is waning from the Middle East. You see, more and more countries are now leaning towards China, as per the latest reports that I understood. So US lagged behind in this. Also, in terms of Iran, Russia, China, if you look at from that perspective, and as you said, Iran is also preparing for a longer situation here in this. Does it look like to be? How should we look at it? Are we towards moving towards a broader conflict, another World War III? If we can look at it, how does it look? Because US is facing its own difficulties across the world. We'll come to the Niger part here a bit later, but I want to understand from that angle, Middle East angle.
In the Middle East, from a military perspective, US certainly could be doing a lot more. In fact, the fact that all these conflicts are still ongoing is precisely the failure of deterrence, the failure of use existing instruments effectively in a way that sends a strong enough a message to put an end to much weaker parties. And even China is much weaker than the United States, at least for now, and yet they're moving into the Middle East militarily aggressively. When it comes to political and business influence, US is finally starting to fight back. It may be too little too late, but at least it's a start. And we can see that from their announcement of an AI alliance with the UAE, which has been under very heavy Chinese and Russian influence, especially with China, especially when it comes to both technology and military, actually. US first used its kind of diplomatic weight to negotiate a private arrangement for a huge investment by Microsoft into a company called G42, which had ties to China previously, and agreed to temper them in response to that. And then it announced that it will be attracting additional investments from major companies um, uh, such as Open AI, which appeared to be initially just a private, venture, but now it seems that the U.S. government is formally backing it in a move to woo UAE away, and we have seen that it has succeeded because Abu Dhabi did announce that they will be giving preference to US technology as opposed to Chinese technology, which is, a win for US, and it's certainly a win from UAE because they will be getting better technology. Despite the fact that China's investments into AI are huge, in reality, US is still taking a very strong lead when it comes to the actual positive results. And quite frankly, the competition between these two countries in terms of investments benefits UAE. So it's understandable why they actually see that as a positive step. Now, it will take a lot more work from the US to counter the level of investment China has already made into Middle Eastern countries. Less so with Russia because Russia had less to invest. Russia's influence is backed by other things, especially in Iraq with the oil purchases, but also its presence in OPEC, which US could also easily counter if it wanted to. It has made um, uh, economic errors such as putting its LNG exports on pause. Had this not been the case, US would have been outbidding the entire OPEC if it chose to. Um, so all of these things are, it's possible to counter them, but it will need to be very consistent, very public, and thoughtful, and it will take a lot of assessment, because I'm getting the sense that US may not have the correct understanding just how far China has gotten in the region. So, in order to actually develop a more effective response, you first need to understand the scope of the problem, which I'm not sure the US does. But it is positive that they are trying to take more thoughtful and more strategic steps than just some individual deals and form these sorts of alliances. And it also underscores the importance of the AI race to this rivalry, to the situation.
Right, right, Irina. Now, in terms of US blocking Palestinian full membership at the UN, why doesn't it want to solve it? Means, what is US's problem here? If because it wants to help Palestine, it wants to defend Israel, but it does not want to come down to a solution. There has to be a solution. Why is the US or especially not looking at a long-term solution rather than piecemeal solutions if we see it from our angle?
Well, quite frankly, admitting an entity which has no formal UN recognition as a full state, member is unprecedented and makes no sense from international law perspective. Nobody else would enjoy that. There are plenty of nations that have quests for independence, but and some may even have an observer status, but not one of them has been admitted a full member until they actually become a state, which is fair. Right? This is just simply applying the same standard to everybody. As for the recognition of the state, that is for the Palestinians themselves to solve. They now have an internal war between them. Fatah just accused Hamas of engineering a humanitarian crisis. This is not Israel. This is their rivals. They're basically two factions competing for power, and until they come up with a plan for leadership, you will not have a single state, and that has nothing to do with anyone other than the people themselves. So they have to figure it out. No one can do that for them. It's as simple as that. People are trying to read a lot into it. I think the desire to create this one entity is genuine by the Biden administration, but I also think they're severely underestimating the sectarian factions inside these territories, and the level of disunity and resentment and mutual recriminations, and the amount of hard work it would take to make that actually workable. I don't think single-handedly making an announcement is actually going to solve the problem.
Right, Irina, right. So from one crisis, let's to move on to another crisis again, where US is very much in the picture. The US Russia-Ukraine war going on, and US House has to clear those bills so that Ukraine can get the much needed help. I don't know how much this will help, because it has rejected giving any Israel-like security guarantees to Ukraine. So help us understand what is going on. Zelensky has been talking about that we will not be able to almost last for long in front of Russia, and that we need the aid very fast. So even if you get the aid, how far? That is not the solution, because Russia is very much entrenched. So how does this whole thing look like? How should I understand? Do I only look at war going for longer duration rather than any solution?
Well, I think this aid is very important. It's an important band-aid. It's not the solution for all the problems, but it's important to keep Ukraine from losing right now. Because if it loses right now, if Russia succeeds in an offensive that's expected to take place in May, then there's be nothing more to say. It's not nearly enough in terms of what it would take to achieve a full victory, and quite frankly, there are challenges ahead. It took 6 months to just pass these three bills inside the House. Now there's been steps to reconcile them with the language that the Senate approved. All of that was a huge waste of time, because, by the way, the uh, immigration, the border security aspect of it ended up not being covered at all, and the Republicans actually did not make any gains out of it in terms of cuts that they were demanding in response. So I'm not sure why they wasted so much time and didn't get anything for it. I think was politically absurd. But there is also a concern that come November, if Donald Trump wins or if Republicans make significant gains in Congress, that could also delay or cancel any future aid prospects, even if they are loans, like this particular package. But until then, Ukraine will have enough to hang on and to wait until European aid starts coming in, which takes time. Getting out all these supplies, waiting for them, waiting for this ammunition, it takes time, which is why it's important to figure out longer term solutions, push for additional aid quickly. Now, this aid we're talking about is a package for 2024. The prospects for 2025 are not clear yet. And by the way, the package of weapons we are seeing are being provided now, including an older version of ATACMS long-range missiles, these are all things that were approved basically or considered about 6 months ago and proposed by the administration and various other parties, stakeholders to this. And a lot of the actual current aid bill, just only about 1/4 is actual aid to Ukraine. The rest is it goes towards reconstituting U.S. supplies, which is just as important. But let's be clear, this has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. It has to do with U.S. own capabilities and the fact that we've been giving away older supplies and we need to replenish our own arsenals with new research and development on that end. So we do have a big problem. That problem is not immediate, and it's unfortunate that the administration, which has the tools to solve all these things very easily, continues to play this uncertainty about what the results it actually wants to see in Ukraine. If it is committed to pushing the Russians out, it cannot afford to slow roll aid and to hem and haw. If you're committed to victory, then you need to do whatever it takes, including risking escalation, which, by the way, does not happen. U.S. refused to provide long-range missiles to Ukraine out of fear that if they're used inside Russia's territory, Russia will escalate. But Ukraine used other types of weapons. It used its own drones. It very successfully undercut the oil refineries and a Shahid factory in Russia, and no escalation beyond what was predictable, airstrikes and the like took place. So clearly, additional weapons are not going to make a difference from Russia's standpoint, but they will make a difference for Ukraine. So that's why I think that this sort of not unstrategic kind of response is not helpful, but it is good that at least something got done. It's better than nothing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now let's look at another front for US, and in Niger. Let's move into the Niger part of it. There, US troops have been, asked to withdraw. So in a way, they have to now. They are negotiating about the time and all. But it shows that Russia is all gaining much more ground in that part of the world with other countries, not just Niger now. At least 2 to 3 other countries now moving on towards the Russian side, and they will be speaking the Russian, Russian voice in many forums across the world. How does this Niger thing happen? Means suddenly US lost ground because French lost ground, or is it they're losing on the diplomacy front?
Well, it certainly the French losing ground certainly didn't help matters, but U.S. And the fact that you now have undemocratic juntas that are being propped up by Russian forces also is not helpful. They don't actually need a reason to continue with the U.S. given that Russia is guaranteeing them backing. That said, I'm not entirely sure from their perspective it makes any sense. Russia has a very poor record on counterterrorism. All of these countries are facing internal insurgency and insurrection problems, both from separatists and from terrorist organizations. I'm not entirely sure that Russia is really going to be all that helpful in staving them off initially maybe the government will has stronger weapons, but the militaries of those countries are very poorly organized, poorly trained. They are not particularly loyal to the state, and by attacking civilians, they also increase recruitment statistics for the jihadist groups. So um, we are likely to see a very messy security situation in West Africa in the near future. But the problem is Russia is also expanding rapidly by essentially bribing these governments by, you know, playing on the anti-colonialist sentiments by spearheading massive propaganda campaigns and pushing for a sort of soft power influence, and also by gaining control of strategic resources, including mines, by any means possible. US kind of dropped the ball. They're not really effectively making the case for why they're better for the people than Russia, and why that security alliance makes sense, and why they're needed. They're really not making that argument very clearly, and it was a huge mistake not to stand up when to these forces that were trying to kick US out. It was a huge mistake not to stand up for the legitimate governments. The president of Niger has been imprisoned, literally starved. This is not a way to treat your ally. Allowing him to be mistreated and abused in the hands of um, putschists. So, if US strongly believes in democracy as strongly as it claims to, then it sure has a funny way of fighting it where it matters. It's one thing to, you know, to go around on a lecture tour around the world, finger wagging about assorted internal dispute. Another thing, actually stand up when a democracy is really being subverted by very obviously undemocratic forces. So, U.S. should be, put its money where its mouth is, and if it wants to gain a loyal following and avoid these situations in the future, it needs to show that it's willing to go the distance for their allies and for its own principles, and it has a better vision of the future and has something to offer.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of questions on the way US has, looked at Niger and other countries. One more thing I wanted to understand was with some of the Russian forces that are now in Niger, they have brought in air defense system with them, if I understand well from some of the reports. Now, why do they need the air defense system in case they are looking at Al Qaeda or say or ISIS? Because they don't seem to have planes. So what is the whole point here? Are they looking at some sort of a different sort of a angle from operating from Niger with these systems in place now?
Well, there were several potential external threats that we were concerned about. One was from the ECOWAS countries, the Western African countries, that at one point threatened to restore legitimate governments by force. That did not happen. They actually even backed away from sanctions very quickly. So that alliance is being weakened, broken up by Russia. Not a good thing from US perspective, by the way. Now you have even more dependency, even less African autonomy, sovereignty being exercised. Not a good development at all. Another was a concern that France might try to make a comeback and attack these countries, which again many expected Macron to have done. He hasn't, which is why many people are questioning his commitments and his statements elsewhere. If he could not even defend France's interests and he was afraid of losing ground, is what is his word worth on the market? And the third, of course, is a possibility of some sort of a US led confrontation or some sort of a other external external confrontation if the situation now gets out of hand, if US moves in to try to restore the legitimate government, or if it provides backing to the separatists and provides them with serious enough weapons or other independence move or other movements. No, I don't actually expect any of these things to happen at a given date, and certainly not with this administration. But these guys are thinking far ahead, and quite frankly, if they continue behaving the way they are, which is massive human rights abuses, massive corruption, they will make even more enemies than they have already.
Right, right. Again, now let's look at the US now. This was from away from the US internally. China has banned US American social media chat apps and also have sent out hackers on against US infrastructure. Again, Russian hackers, they have hacked water utilities in Texas as far as the reports say. So what's happening here? Means is there a set of complacency that has come in US way of thinking in terms of their diplomacy, in terms of their infrastructure capabilities to protect them, because the elections are underway, and everybody is just noticing if there will be a change in government?
So in terms of what's happening with the hacking attacks, they're all not only predictable, but the U.S. intelligence agencies have been very loudly making warnings and announcements about it in public, which is supposed to tell you that the scope of the problem is very real. That the reason these intelligence agencies go public is that they want to make sure that the parties who are not listening to them, which means local governments responsible for this infrastructure and private companies, that they take note and that they can't pretend that they weren't warned about it. Unfortunately, it seems to me to have had very limited impact, given that the Russians succeeded with the water utilities despite numerous warnings. That said, securing those utilities will also take time. It will not happen once just because a threat was announced. It is going to take time. The Chinese hackers are also not a new phenomena. Only now they're discovering that they've been buried inside the U.S. infrastructure for 7 years, and even after being discovered, continuing to try again, which is exactly what you would expect them to do. But it is not an excuse for private companies and agencies in the government to not do the best job possible in reviewing their own security protocols and being more vigilant. And unfortunately, it's been a big problem all around, both in the US government, federal government agencies, especially, and also on the private front. The security is really quite lax. Ironically, just as China is very much pushing the limits on its, you know, engaging in outright illegal attacks. In the US, it is also obsessively becomes controlling on the information front at home, and it's banning um, apps and chats by American companies. It's cracking down on communications. It's tying all these things to social credit system at home. It's looking to control political discourse more, and it's making forcing US companies such as Apple to take unprecedented steps that are completely undemocratic. Now, Apple has been at the forefront of claiming to be pro human rights activist, pro human rights defense. It has claimed that it's been obsessing with the Pegasus situation, claiming breaches of data privacy and security and so forth. And ironically, Apple is taking completely undemocratic, un-American measures at behest of an authoritarian states just to stay on the market, because Apple has is being edged out of the Chinese markets by Huawei, which has apparently stolen American phone technology and has made cheaper versions of it using local raw materials that are harder to access in the United States, and it's becoming more popular in most of the world because it's significantly cheaper. And Apple has been trying to court China. It met with Xi Jinping. It's also opened a new office in Shanghai just recently. So it's fighting for its share at the market, but ironically, it's coming out looking worse than ever before and not committed to its own principle. It's all looking very, very hypocritical at best and self serving.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. As they say in international diplomacy, nothing is permanent. No, and everything is centered around interests. Perhaps it's the same in business, and everyone understands things from that way. Forget about the noises that we all make. either in corporate or in politics. Be that as it may, let's look at something big happening. The world's largest democracy is going through its elections. I'm talking about India, my country, in this part of the world. I see a lot of reports there, but with so many crises across the world, how do you see these elections from that part of the world in terms of, is it making enough noise? Because the world, I mean, it's this time when so much, closed systems are coming up, people talk about, closed systems. India is still keeping the democracy flag flying high in its own ways. We do have challenges, but the world's biggest democracy, largest democracy is having its elections. How do you see? Do you see it overshadowed by all these events, or do you see it not?
Well, I think part of the reason that the coverage has not been all that big is because this election is unique in that it has 7 phases that take place over the course of 6 weeks, and I doubt anyone in the United States, at least, has the attention span that long. I think the closer it gets to the final days of the races, the more attention it will get once the drama heats up a little bit. In the meantime, the coverage focuses on individual stories, complaints by various candidates against each other and against the ruling party. The usual sort of noise that you would expect in such situations. I think very few people really understand how the system works. I think that's part of the problem, and I think the fact that there's so little understanding of how the elections work in India will contribute to somewhat of a negative coverage, or the prevalence of negative coverage, because it's so easy for people complaining to get their story out. The journalists simply don't understand what's really going on. It's hard to keep track of them, whereas negative stories are very easy to cover. They always seem to make sense. So I think one thing that India needs to do is kind of try to put out explainers or some basic thing that explains how the process works and why each phase is important, and at what point we should all tune in collectively. Because when you have almost 1.5 billion people, of course it's going to take much longer than with countries fraction of that size. And even in France, though, you often have two phases of elections, and that's a much smaller country, and most people are confused and have no idea what's going on. So imagine this situation. But I do think that by the time May rolls around, there'll be more coverage, regardless of the events, just because it's so important, and more people will be acknowledging and speaking about it. Right now, it's just relatively early in the process, and I think
Absolutely.
yes, it is overshadowed, but not because it doesn't matter, simply because it's too long.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that is understandable. But one thing is for sure that whatever the situation right now, politically and both from an economic point of view, India, the world will it continues to watch India, and I'm sure a lot of interest will come in as the no more phases of elections come in, and the results are going to come out on June 4th. But a lot of people will get that impression who exactly most of the reports are saying Prime Minister Narendra Modi will win for the third time, and let's see how it happens. But that's what the probability is. That's what a lot of reports are also saying, and that's what we understand. Now let's move on from the India story is to again to the American story. Also, a lot of what Iraqi PM in the United States and even the Japanese PM in the United States. Tell us specifically about the Iraq PM. What do they want from the US? Japan, we can still understand, but help us understand what is he doing there.
So, actually, interestingly enough, the issue he was scared to speak about was very important and yet got very little coverage, precisely because that visit came at a very bad time of the Israel
Right.
Iran attack. And so, unfortunately, and also Dubai's airport got flooded at about the same time. So, everybody trying to come back to the region was busy with. With their journey problems. But one of the big things he wanted to talk about is the banking issue. So the collection of Iraqi banks were asked by US officials to take measures to de-dollarize to avoid Iran, which has been collecting money for various things, from being able to access dollars and so forth in order to not capitalize on that on the international markets. The problem is these are half measures. Half measures because Iran would still, under this arrangement, have access to euros, which actually, are at about the same, strength than the US dollar, and therefore it would still be a problem. And it actually puts Europe in a better position than US. It it causes a problem in that many non-profits in Iraq cannot be paid because they were being paid in dollars. It weakens US influence in Iraq and strengthens Chinese and Russian influence. And most importantly, it ultimately does not deny Iran access to money. So that what US should be doing is combating, is not giving any more waivers to Iran, instead working with Iraq to solve electricity and other energy problems, maybe finding suppliers from somewhere else in the region, but certainly not empowering Iran. I think the solution was just not very helpful at all. I think it will backfire. But because of what everything that's going on, it's not clear how and whether it would get resolved at all. I think this is just did not come at a good time.
Absolutely, absolutely. One last story I wanted to talk about is the Japanese workers. They are in Pakistan doing their work, and they have to bear with this attempt of suicide bombing. Why is Japan here in crossfire with terrorists? Are they doing something wrong? Japanese workers are very peaceful. What is happening there?
Well, there's a few things going on. First of all, the Japanese workers were not the only ones targeted this time. In the past, you've had Chinese workers targeted precisely because they're a strong ally of Pakistan, and some of the terrorist organizations vying for independence or for power inside Pakistan obviously wanted to get, to cause economic and political destruction in addition to everything else. The Japanese workers, a similar story. This is a message aimed at the Pakistani government, not necessarily a fight to pick with Japan directly. For now, most of these organizations are not fully internationalized. They're more focused on Central Asia and parts of Southeast Asia, but they are becoming more international over time. ISIS-K, for instance, is expanding inside Europe. There's been multiple thwarted attacks over the past couple of years. So I wouldn't be surprised if they targeted anyone that they could get to at various points in times. And the Japanese are seen as a soft target precisely because they're peaceful. Um, so it's not yet a direct message to Japan, but it could become so in the future.
Absolutely. There's a lot going on in the world. A lot is happening in all parts of the world, either elections, either conflict, or either business. And as these things happen, we will continue to get you to make sense of it all for us, every 2 weeks. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.